Hello. I want to talk about, well, really something that comes up pretty much every day. If you are active on social media and, like me, you are on the, I guess you'll call it, like page of numerous news outlets, then there isn't a day goes by when there isn't a report about people being offended over something or another. Now, I want to sort of break this video into two parts. Firstly, the issue at hand and what I think of it. And secondly, the wider issue of how the whole concept of being offended is actually subjective in itself. And I'll go into a bit more detail about that. But first of all, the controversy I'm talking about, the latest controversy, if you can keep track, is that the retail company H&M has found itself in hot water because they used a little black boy to model a new hood product. And I don't know if it's the name of the product or it was a tagline, but to be honest, that is a secondary issue. What is what matters is the response and how people interpret that response. So anyway, this tagline uh, or the slogan or whatever it was cheeky monkey, right? Little black boy was the model. Now, the response has been, oh, how racist, because they're using a black kid and there's monkey connotations. Well, as is always the case with these sort of things, there's two camps. There are those who are offended, and there's those who say it's overblown. And I suppose you could say there's a third camp. I very much fall into the second and third camp, and this is why. When you have problems in society where there is actual racial hatred, where you get racist abuse, and unfortunately that does happen, I find it very sad that there are people who will interpret something in a certain way that really fundamentally is probably innocent. I find it very hard to believe that a multinational, well-known retail chain like H&M would deliberately try to make a racial slur. That's very hard to believe. But actually, if you dig a bit deeper into it, when we're talking about racism and if we're talking about racist actions, surely automatically assuming that there must be a racial connotation between monkeys and black people, surely that is actually racist itself. So surely the perception of racism comes from a racist mindset. Ironically, so those who are pontificating, I came across one group on the other side of the Atlantic, Latino Dallas, whether that's a chain or whether it's whatever, but they were all up in arms. So we're going to stand up and this is not acceptable and we're going to come out in force. And um, notwithstanding the fact that Latino Dallas sounds like an ethnocentric and divisive sort of um, brand itself, you know, it's just sad that people look so much into every single thing as having a racial connotation. There's a few points to consider about this. The boy's parents obviously agreed to it. They've obviously got money for it. Point one. Point two, let's imagine a little white boy or a little white girl had been used. Why would that not be racist? Why is it only racist because it was a little black boy? Is it because there are some racists today and in the past who will compare black people to monkeys? Is that why there's a racial connotation? Because if that's the case, then actually you're giving them the vocabulary. The problem is with situations like this, big companies never really or rarely can afford to really defend themselves. The only choice they really have when there is an outcry about something is to apologize. Now, I'm not so sure if this is always the right approach because then you have a situation where it's kind of mob rule. Like the people are outraged, so you must cave in. If I was H&M, I would say we are sorry that this has offended some people. It was not our intention, but we do not agree this is a racial thing. So actually, rather than just apologizing, I would actually get into, well, actually, the onus is on you to show that this is in fact racist. The problem I've got is when you get people who are digging into every single issue that they don't like and insisting that it must be racism or sexism or homophobia, you get a situation where not only does it create overt sensitivity, where companies have to be ultra careful, but it creates a problem whereby the whole concept of something like racism becomes distorted. Whereby, I mean, the people who are outraged about this are treating it like it is the same as some drunk yob on a train hurling racist abuse at someone. I would argue they're not even in the same world. That's what I have a problem with race baiters, as I would call them. People who always, always, always seek to find racism in everything. The problem is, probably more than any other allegation, even more than sexism, more than homophobia, more than any other form of bigotry, racism has such a toxic impact on those who are accused. So H&M, no wonder they apologised. I think if they had went along my line and said we don't agree that it is racist, the campaigners would get even more angry and the pitchforks would come out even more. Oh, they're making excuses for it. They're downplaying it. And then you would see a campaign, united against H&M, etc., etc. But this brings me to the next part of the video. What is deemed to be offensive or inappropriate can also be subjective. And I realized something yesterday that and this is something of a confession, I cannot say that there are not things that bother me, right? There was another controversy this week in Northern Ireland. A Sinn Fein MP was revealed to have posted a picture on Twitter, I believe, and he had a loaf of bread in a store, Kingsmill bread. It's a well-known bread brand. Now that would seem harmless on the surface. The problem was he was doing this on the 42nd anniversary of one of the most notorious acts of terrorism in the Troubles, the Kingsmill massacre. If you don't know the history, that's when an offshoot of the IRA kidnapped 10 Protestant workers. This wasn't rival paramilitary people, just innocent construction workers. Lined them up against, I believe it was the side of the road, and shot them. It was apparently in revenge for an atrocity committed by loyalist paramilitaries the day before, in which 6 Catholics were killed. Regardless, if Northern Ireland's to have real reconciliation, it must be led by elected representatives now. He said that it was purely a coincidence. He apologised under pressure from his party. And he said it was purely a coincidence. I have to say, I find that hard to believe, given the track record of Sinn Féin as being basically the political wing of the IRA, and given the fact that it was on the anniversary, and of all the bread brands he could have chosen, he chose Kingsmill. That was the name of the village where the massacre occurred. So it is a hard push to really believe that was a coincidence. That's his official line. Um, and there was a lot of anger about that. And I felt angry because I felt that it was an unacceptable and crass insult to victims' families. I believe to have reconciliation, it needs to be led from elected representatives. This is a man who is paid. Sinn Féin MPs don't take up the seats, but he is paid, and he should have some level of decorum. So I then found myself asking, well, there's one issue here, the H&M thing, I think has been taken out of context, and it isn't racist in my opinion. The other thing I think was inappropriate, and it's understandable that it's a controversy now. There will be those who say, but wait a second, Nathan, you're being offended by one thing but not another. So that leaves me asking the question, well, yeah, yeah, I guess we can say that the whole concept of offence is is subjective. I would say this though. I do think there is an onus on people if they are bothered by something to explain why. So those who are saying H&M is racist, it's not good enough saying, oh, they're racist, how terrible. They have to explain why it is racist. I don't believe it is. So the onus, I think too often when accusations are made in general, too much of the onus is on the accused, whether that be an individual or whether it be a company. Too much of the time the onus is on them to have to defend themselves rather than the accuser in cases where these things are alleged to say this is why. Now, in the case of the Kingsmill stunt, whatever you want to call it, I will explain why I think that was inappropriate. Well, I have, because it was the anniversary, and because of all the brands of bread he could have chosen, he chose that one. I don't believe that it was a coincidence. That's my gut feeling. I believe he knew full well what he's doing. He deleted it immediately, which indicates to me that it was a rather sick PR thing. Now, in the grand scheme of things, you may argue a man putting a loaf on his head is harmless. But I do think, as an elected representative, when Northern Ireland is still dealing with reconciliation, and it will be for years to come, those are still raw wounds for families of the victims. So, put it this way: if you had a DUP politician mocking um, Catholic victims of one of the loyalist atrocities, do you think that would, go down well? I don't think so. Even more so, imagine if you had a mainland British politician mocking, say, the Croke Park massacre in Dublin. I mean, you have to look at everything in terms of how it is perceived and what would it be if someone else is doing it or if someone else was in the context. So that's how I feel about it. I do think that we have to always, if we feel angry about something, if we feel outraged about something, we do also have to question ourselves and say, well, why am I angry about this? What is the basis of this anger? Is it justified? And sometimes it is. But I do believe that the onus is on the offended. But I have to say, with the King's Mill thing, just to clarify, I'm not personally offended, but I was angry because I felt it was inappropriate. I can't say I was personally offended because it is not a slight against me as an individual, right? So, in fact, to be quite honest, there's very few things that offend me. There's a lot of things make me angry, but there isn't actually much that offends me, and I think there is a difference. But yeah, those are just a few things to think about. How we perceive offence is subjective, but I do believe that there has to be a basis for that. And the onus is on the offended or the outraged to explain why. Now, whenever I've been angry about something, and I felt that it was necessary to explain it. For example, if I'm writing a comment on a news thread. But I'm not keen on the idea that companies should cave in to mob outrage because that's almost like a form of bullying. It's almost like might is right. Those who shout the loudest are right. There are also a lot of other people, including many black people, say actually it wasn't racist at all because you get a lot of parents who say to their children, "Oh, you cheeky monkey." And I think the issue there is that they are automatically connecting monkey with black people. So actually, the racism, in my opinion, if there is racism, comes from their own mindset. People who always find something sinister in anything, in my opinion, are creating far more division because they're they'll always find something to be offended about. In retrospect, maybe it was a slightly careless move by H&M. Marketing people should have maybe considered this. But I find it very hard to believe that a big multinational company like H&M would deliberately try and offend people. So reckless more than racist, definitely. That's my opinion. But I also think it is sad that something that really is innocent, in my opinion, um, is deemed to be this racism. When I think of racism, I think of drunk yobs abusing people on a train. I think of slavery. I think of um, racist abuse. But we are now getting to the point where racism equals anything that race baiters say it is. That to me is a serious problem. So those are a few things to think about, and let me know your thoughts. Thank you.